Okay, so good evening to you all. Hopefully you can hear me. This is Shane O'Sullivan from London. It's 11 p.m. here, and I can't see you, but hopefully you can see me, and you're picking me up. Okay, maybe Joe can shoot me a message if all is well or not. But anyway, let me start my presentation. So first I'd like to thank John very much for inviting me and for to speak about the Sirhan case, and also Joe for helping set up this connection and the video clips I'll play for you later. For those of you who don't know my work, this is my book, Who Killed Bobby, and also my film, RFK Must Die. Let me see, there, you can see it on the webcam there. So that was the product of kind of 4 years looking into the Sirhan case, and those both came out in 2008. But it's still something that I'm very passionate about and that I still keep very much up to date with. And I'm going to detail some of the highlights of this year in terms of developments in the case for you this evening. Just to go through three of the main developments there. Let me just, I think I've got some email here from Joe. Hopefully everything is okay. Good, okay. Just want to make sure I wasn't speaking to a non-existent audience. Okay, well, I'm basically going to highlight three major developments in the case this year. The first one was back in March, Sirhan's parole hearing. So this was on March 2nd, and it was interesting because, first of all, Sirhan's parole hearing at this stage is every 5 years. So the previous one was 2006, and then the next one was obviously March 2011. And also Sirhan had been so, I think, negative about his chances of getting parole or receiving a fair hearing that this was actually the first time in 14 years that he'd actually attended his parole hearing. And this time it was also in the company of his attorneys, William Pepper and Laurie Dusak. So it was very interesting to see the actual proceedings themselves. I sent a cameraman there and obtained a recording of the 3-hour proceedings. So it was extremely interesting to see Sirhan there present with a new attorney, William Pepper, taking over from the great work that Larry Teeter had done previously before his death from cancer. And also the counter-arguments of the Los Angeles County Deputy DA and the interruptions, I have to say, of the parole commissioner, who seemed to have his parole verdict written well in advance of the hearing. So the whole interaction was very interesting, but the body of it was, Pepper presenting his case for the first time in a public forum on Sirhan's behalf, and central to Pepper's presentation was an 18-page declaration of Dr. Dan Brown. So this is, I think, one of the key developments during the year. Dr. Dan Brown is an associate clinical professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, and he was summarizing in this 18-page declaration 60 hours spent working with Sirhan in 6 two-day sessions over the previous 3 years. So from August 2008 to September 2010, he had spent 60 hours trying to work with Sirhan to recall exactly what happened in the days and hours leading up to the shooting, and what Sirhan could recall of that, and what he could possibly retrieve from his memory through some of the work that they did together in the prison where Sirhan was held. First in Corcoran, and then in the prison where Sirhan is now after he was moved during these sessions. So Dr. Brown re-explored with Sirhan, especially the last 24 hours from Sirhan going to the firing range the afternoon before the shooting, Sirhan's seemingly random decision to go down to the Ambassador Hotel to check out the campaign parties, getting drunk on 4 Tom Collins cocktails because it was a hot night and he wanted to blend in with the kind of party atmosphere, returning to his car around 9 p.m. feeling unable to drive home because he was drunk and he wasn't a drunker, returning to the hotel for coffee to sober up, and then meeting this mysterious girl who then led him into a dark place where he blacked out until he was choked on a steam table after the shooting, having not been able to remember the shooting itself or the minutes or hours leading up to it. So one of the products of these sessions with Sirhan that Dr. Brown did was Sirhan recalling going into range mode in the kitchen pantry where Kennedy was shot. So this was a new development from Sirhan's memory recall, And he basically remembered when the girl who was with him in the pantry, who Sirhan recalls having a white dress, but others have said had a polka dot dress, black and white polka dot dress. When the girl pinched him or tapped him on the shoulder, it triggered a trance state in which he thought he was back at the gun range where he'd been the previous afternoon. So as Dr. Brown got Sirhan to react to some of these key scenes in the moments before the shooting, Dr. Brown and Laurie Dusak observed Sirhan switch into range mode on several occasions during these reenactments. And in this range mode, Sirhan would basically automatically take a firing stance and in an uncharacteristic robot-like voice describe shooting at vital human organs. Not aware that he was shooting at Bobby Kennedy, just that he was back in the firing range. He saw circular targets in front of his eyes, and that's what he was shooting at, until he was choked on the steam table after the shooting, and then he regained some sort of semi-consciousness. So Dr. Brown essentially, in this 18-page declaration, came to the conclusion that Sirhan was indeed hypnotically programmed and coerced into committing the assassination. So this work is a major step forward in strengthening the case for Sirhan as a possible Manchurian candidate. So the second development during the year, which will kind of summarize some of Dr. Brown's report and take it a step further perhaps, is that after the press coverage of the parole verdict and the normal media stereotypes about Sirhan as the lone assassin and so on, this mention of range mode then inspired a British hypnotist called Darren Brown, a kind of David Blaine figure here in the UK, to attempt to hypnotically program a carefully selected, highly suggestible member of the audience from his television program to assassinate a well-known British celebrity using similar conditioning to that possibly used on Sirhan. So this was a very high-profile program on British television, 9 o'clock on a Friday night on one of our main channels, Channel 4, with a lot of production value, a lot of resources gone into the production, and which gained a rating over here of 1.8 million viewers. So the programming process, when you watch the program, and I'm going to show two clips to you in a moment, you can see the programming process was modeled on the Sirhan case, very tightly on the Sirhan case. The hypnotic triggers were a girl in a polka dot dress and a mobile phone ringtone that would send the assassin into marksman mode. So it's an anglicization of this range mode that Sirhan described. And the Sirhan story in this 1 hour special is interwoven and threaded through the piece as the most high-profile example of a hypnotically programmed assassin, and it's then used as a kind of a jumping off point to say, well, is this possible? So I'm going to show you two clips from this program. First, let's look at how the experiment is set up, and after this part 1 clip, I'll briefly set up the end of the show and its conclusion. So I'll show you two clips. Let's see the first part. I'll briefly set up the conclusion, and then Joe can show you the second part. So Joe, if you can just show part 1, clip 1 of Darren Brown. I'll start it on my computer now as well, and then hopefully by the time we both finish watching it, I'll start talking again. Okay, hope you enjoy it.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's experiment, which asks, is it possible to program somebody to kill and without them realizing it? Conspiracy theorists claim that the CIA hypnotized unsuspecting candidates to carry out assassinations in the 50s and 60s, most notably that of Senator Robert Kennedy. Tonight we'll find out if that's even possible, or just the stuff of movie fiction. Oh my God. Senator Kennedy has been shot in the head. In June 1968, 24-year-old Palestinian refugee Sirhan shot dead presidential candidate Robert Kennedy in a hotel pantry. More than 40 years later, he still claims to have no memory of committing the act.
I don't remember. I must have been too hypnotized, too much out of my senses to really be aware of what happened.
It was obvious that he had been programmed to kill Robert Kennedy and programmed to forget that he'd been programmed.
During tonight's experiment, I'll be testing to see whether such unlikely sounding claims are actually possible. In order to condition Chris to become an assassin, I'll be using brainwashing techniques allegedly employed by the CIA's MK-Ultra program in the 1960s. There are two key stages to this process, the marksman mode and spontaneous amnesia. Eyewitness accounts report that Robert Kennedy's assassin, Sirhan Sirhan, was in a trance-like state during the shooting. Under hypnosis, the convicted killer has since said that he thought he was firing at a target in a rifle range and not at a human being. He claims a mystery woman in a polka dot dress pinched him on the shoulder to send him into this range or marksman mode. I'm going to try to create a similar mode for Chris, which will come into play if and when he attempts to assassinate his celebrity target. So I've brought him to a rifle range just outside London to meet Angie, an independent firearms instructor. Chris believes we're here to improve his aim through hypnosis. His aim may improve, but more importantly, I'll also be creating the marksman mode he needs to slip into during the assassination attempt.
There's a mode that you move into. You might call it the marksman. It's almost like a personality within you, which you move into when you bring the gun out. And your unconscious mind will allow you to do that with the focus and relaxation and concentration of that experienced marksman.
Next, I'll need to implant an audio trigger that, once set off, will automatically put Chris into marksman mode.
So this is the sound that's going to lodge itself very deeply into your unconscious. So whenever you hear that sound, whenever you hear that ringtone, the mind will shift to this marksman state. And then, as you feel it take you over, as you feel everything just moving into place, and everything settling, when you're ready to give yourself that final bit of focus, you bring your finger up, you can do it now, put yourself on the forehead, and you become the marksman. That's very good.
Sirhan Sirhan claims that he has no memory of killing Bobby Kennedy.
I've never been able to remember what happened in that place at that time, but I have not been able to remember many things and incidents which took place in the weeks leading up to the shooting.
In March 2011, he was denied parole for the 14th time because he hasn't shown enough remorse or taken full responsibility for the crime that he says he doesn't remember committing.
We know with some degree of distrust, quite frankly, we're remembering parts of this and not remembering others.
I want you to look at this.
And as you look at that, I want you to go into trance and keep your eyes open.
You will have absolutely no memory of anything that occurs during the time that you're listening. Whenever you see this polka dot design, whether it's on a screen like this or a handkerchief or anywhere, you will move instantly and comfortably into this trance state.
Okay, so hopefully you've finished the clip one there. So you can see how closely it was modelled on Sirhan, the use of the polka dots and also the marksman mode to basically implant the amnesia so that the subject wouldn't be able to remember what he'd done, and also the use of the marksman mode and the use of hypnosis to actually make him into a great marksman. You know, his shooting ability, having no experience before, got much better when he was in a trance state, the intense heightened concentration and the effect of that, and also then the program to act out the role of the marksman when triggered in a public setting later on in the show. So we're going to move it on now basically to part two, which is the conclusion of the show. And so basically what happens here is the subject is taken to a public auditorium. He's told that he's going to meet Derren Brown afterwards, and he's going to have a meeting with Stephen Fry, who's a famous British celebrity over here. And basically he's just supposed to watch the show and enjoy it. He doesn't know he's being filmed, but on the way into the theatre in London, he's asked to keep a box to give to Derren afterwards. The box contains a gun. It contains three bullets in the gun. He's to keep it very safe with him because Derren needs it for the meeting afterwards they're going to have with Stephen Fry. So keep it close to him at all times. And then he's taken up to a balcony of the theatre overlooking the auditorium. And he's pleasantly watching Stephen Fry give a lecture on the semantics of the English language and English literature. So we'll just watch what happens then when these triggers are applied in this particular setting. So Joe, if you could just show clip 2 there from Darren Brown, and I'll come back to you after that.
In our culture, we keep certain words in a special place in our brain. But I remember going to the Turkana people in northern Kenya. Kenya alone has 69 languages. And the Turkana people speak one which is related to only one of the other 69, the Nilo-Hamitic language. It's a beautiful language, it's rich, it's like English, it's full of fine. God bless her. Thank you for that. Amazing ideas, brilliant concepts, but been swamped by Swahili. That's the problem, you see. Other languages like Swahili are swamping Africa, just as English is swamping Europe and the world and the internet, and Mandarin Chinese is swamping the Orient. No one really understands how to say the language, or whether a language is worth saving. France, for example, has the language of and the French has absolutely no space. These are intrinsically happy themselves. Very extraordinary institutions, happy themselves. Who are great minds and thinkers. They decide which words are allowed into the French language. Words are permissible. They are forbidden. And the words are not forbidden. You just make words up. Cordial is a word for female. The female. Ordinateur. So they made up words which were not allowed into the language.
Anything strange happened during the talk? I'm going to show you some footage of something that did happen. We actually had a camera view. I know we didn't let you know that we were filming, which was important. Remember that woman in the polka dot dress? No. Don't remember turning around talking to you? No. Remember that bit? No. Yes, at the moment you will have no memory to store, but you just assassinated a national treasure.
You should be.
Okay, so look, you know when you have a dream and you have no memory of it, then somebody says something that just kind of triggers it, and then bit by bit it just starts to come back. And if you do think about it now, just start to think back for me. It's just like a mental block that you have there at the moment. And you can just start to let that go, and you can start to let it. It's coming back.
I remember the poker that woman doing that. And yeah, just kind of picking the gun up from the side like I was told.
Where did you think you were?
Nowhere, but if anywhere, it's closest to like the range because I can visualise the lights going down and the target and picking up. Felt like I was picking off that bench.
Did you feel anything when you were aiming a loaded gun at Stephen?
No. Just felt like the kind of the outline of the target.
Wow.
It's probably the last thing I'd ever think I'd do. I really didn't believe that it happened, but I've been shown that it has.
Okay, so hopefully you finished clip 2 there, and I mean I've obviously seen the whole program, but I think it's just an extraordinary model, if you like, that makes the whole idea of Sirhan as a Manchurian candidate accessible to people like me, people like you, the media, politicians, judiciary. I mean, just laying out what may have been involved in terms of this case and what may have been done. And according to Darren Brown, how simple it was. You know, if you knew what you were trying to do, how easy it was to manipulate the right subject. Obviously, he'd whittled his audience down to the most highly hypnotizable, highly suggestible candidates and picked his candidate and then worked it through. And Darren Brown himself, I met him for 90 minutes in the lead up to the program to brief him on the Sirhan case, because I didn't want clips from my film appearing in a program that would just kind of take the piss or ridicule the Sirhan case. And he was very interested, and he was amazed at what he was able to accomplish. And he's very interested in supporting the Sirhan case and is going to send a copy of the program to Sirhan's current attorney. So for me, it's very interesting also the reaction on the internet afterwards here in the UK of just the public. I mean, there was immense sympathy for Sirhan. That's what came out on Twitter and Facebook afterwards, that he'd been duped in this way and had taken the fall and been in prison for 40 years for something, you know, so heinous, being manipulated in this way. So if the show got a high-profile slot on US TV, which is yet to be confirmed, you know, I think it could have the same effect in potentially swaying public or media attention back on the case and showing that what seems to be a Hollywood plot could actually be the case in this particular assassination. So you saw some brief clips from the Sirhan parole hearing there, so I thought it was quite a good way to introduce it in the context of the Darren Brown program. I'm going to show you a few more highlights from that, about I think 4 or 5 minutes or so, just because, I mean, again, to hear Sirhan speak publicly for the first time in, you know, 14 years is more interesting than me on a web link from London. So let's watch the final clip, and then I'll come back with the third of my highlights after we watch this. So Joe, if you can just start off the parole clips now, and then I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Thanks.
My name is Sirhan. 17 days from today, I will be 67 years old. I was born in Jerusalem and raised by devoutly Christian parents. I have been a practicing Christian all of my life, and even now I attend church every week. I believe that it is my ultimate faith in God, which has given me the strength to get through the last 45 years of my incarceration.
So, what do you remember about the shooting, if you're willing to talk about that?
Obviously I was there, but I don't remember the exact moment. I don't remember pulling my gun out of my body or wherever it was located, and I don't remember aiming at any human being. I don't remember any of that. And I've said that from the get-go.
Obviously, you had the gun that evening, right?
Yes, I had it, but the uses of it, I'm not aware of too much. I'm not aware that I took it in. I'm not aware that I fired with it, but I was confronted with it later on, and I have to take responsibility for that, and I do.
How do you feel about what you did?
It's the most horrible thing that any human being can do to another. That's really the symbol of mystery. You don't kill me.
How do you make up for that?
My state of mind at the time, I had consumed some 4 glasses of Tom Collins, and I'm not a drinker, so the Tom Collins to me was pretty much like a Kool-Aid or a lemonade, because it was easy to
describe that.
Yes,
so you had 4 of them pretty quick.
I don't remember, but I always went to the same bartender. He seemed to sort of like you tell him to get more.
What bar was that at? Do you remember?
One of the bars at the hotel.
Oh, right at the hotel.
Yes, at the hotel. And it was a very hot night in that June, and it was. I felt comfortable drinking.
All right. Did you feel like you were high at all or buzzed?
That's the part that I don't really remember.
You don't remember.
But I remember wanting to drink and to get some coffee, because I just wanted to make sure that when I drove home that there's no chance that I could.
So you remember that part of it?
Yes, I remember.
You remember wanting to get some coffee
Yes.
prior to the shooting?
Yes.
So what do you you remember next?
I remember being tackled by people there, and they almost choked me to death. And I wish they had, because this thing.
Well, that would have been right either.
I didn't see Bobby Kennedy down. I didn't know what really transpired because they had me on the table, and I think that I came to, or began to feel, to sense what was going on.
So what would you say?
When they were choking,
Yeah.
and they were saying, "Don't kill him," or something like that.
So you heard that?
And I remember some words like that.
Okay. And what did you think had happened?
I didn't know what happened.
Were you nervous at all?
I don't remember. The doctor said that I was in a dissociated state. I must have been either too drunk, too hypnotized, too much out of my senses to really be aware of what happened. And I'm not saying that to be dismissive of this, of my responsibility, but that is really what happened.
Let me just back up a bit. You know, when you were at the hotel and you had the Tom Collins drinks, was there a lady that was with you at some point?
There was I was in my car. I went back to the hotel to get some coffee, and this gal showed up at the same time that I was talking to the bartender, asking him.
Did you know her?
No. And then she said, "Hey, I'm looking for coffee too." And then we were looking, like a coffee hunter.
Were you attracted to her or something?
Well, she was
Pretty? Okay. So did you hang out with her?
I thought that I sort of like wanted to hook up with her.
All right. So what was the conversation?
And then we were always trying to find the coffee, and then we found an urn that was located, and I didn't know it at the time, that was located in the back area of the stage where Bobby Kennedy is supposed to be coming out.
So you both had coffee there?
And then I made the coffee there, and I made her a cup of coffee, and I was looking for a place to pay for it, and there was nobody to pay for it, so we just drank it and we just relaxed.
Oh.
And then some other official comes by and says, "You guys have to leave here because we need this space." And then he told us where to go, and then I thought, and then she led, and I took.
Where did you head for? Do you remember?
She went to where I learned later was the pantry area, and nobody knows who the hell she was. And they said that she was the polka dot girl and this girl, and nobody. She just disappeared.
All right. Well, you remember quite a bit about that.
So I talked with Dr. Brown about it, and this.
Okay, I think hopefully you're just finished watching the parole clips there. So it's the final of the clips this evening. But I think, it's important to get away from the sound bites or, the highlight clips that the media like to show, which is typically Sirhan arguing with the parole commissioner, just to, solidify in our mind the aggression and the anger that he still shows after all these years. I mean, it's so frustrating to watch the full 3 hours and really get a sense of Sirhan the person and how he's changed and how confused he still is after 40 years over what he did as a 24-year-old very young man, and what he experienced that night. And then the easy sound bites and the stereotyping that goes on in the 30 seconds that you then see on the news shows. I hope that 5 minutes was useful just to get a sense of who he is now and, how positive and forward-looking he is after what he's been through, and, how he's still bearing up and full of hope, given what's gone before. And I think one of the things that gives him hope is the attorneys with him in that room. William Pepper, whose work on the King case needs no introduction from me. He's done tremendous work there, and he's done tremendous work over the last 3 years, particularly in terms of bringing Dr. Dan Brown into the case. And the key thing here with Bill Pepper concerns the ongoing habeas corpus petition, which is the third of the highlights of this year, which I'll talk about, which is finally reaching the end game in the next month or two. The situation there is that Larry Teeter, may he rest in peace, originally submitted a habeas corpus petition on behalf of Sirhan, basically listing newly discovered evidence that hadn't been originally presented at the original trial, in part because of the incredibly incompetent showing of Sirhan's trial attorney, Grant Cooper. And that habeas corpus petition had been denied, but then was appealed. And Pepper followed it through and was basically asked to file a supplemental brief to show that there was new evidence that would overcome any accusations of timeliness. Timeliness being that, you know, it's too late to come through with their reinvestigation of the case at this stage on behalf of his client. Now, earlier in the year, without getting into too much legal detail, there was a Lee versus Lampert ruling, which basically stated that a credible claim of actual innocence would override any timeliness criteria. So that basically meant that if Pepper could prove that there was a credible claim of actual innocence and newly discovered evidence that would support that, it would override any mitigating factors about bringing newly discovered evidence to light at this late stage in the game. So what happened was, on August 29th, the respondent in the case, which is the LA County District Attorney's Office, and the petitioner, being Bill Pepper on behalf of Sirhan, were both asked to submit briefs addressing Sirhan's claim of actual innocence. Now, this was a bit of a surprise because, you know, you kind of expected at this stage the institutions to just knock it back and throw it out of court and not give this a fair hearing. But, you know, so it opened a possibility for an evidentiary hearing or for the petition to be granted. And just a crack of light or a crack of hope for Bill Pepper to submit a brief that would detail claims of Sirhan's actual innocence. So basically, Bill Pepper is going to submit that brief tomorrow. So I hope to get a copy of it in the next few days. And it's a very exciting time, obviously, for Bill Pepper to finally put the weight of new evidence in one document to put to Judge Wistrick, who is operating out of the United States District Court, Central District of California. And I'm just going to... and basically, I know you're going to have an ad break coming up that's going to interrupt me for 30 seconds, but hopefully I'll just keep talking. I mean, it's instructive because the LA County DA submitted a brief on September 26th, citing two articles by the British researcher Mel Ayton, whose work is a very myopic take on the assassination and Sirhan as lone gunman and so on. So if the LA County District Attorney is relying on Mel Ayton to do their prosecution's work, I think the state of the argument is in a pretty poor shape. So hopefully Bill Pepper's case, bolstered by Dr. Brown's findings and also the evidence of Phil Van Praag's analysis of the Brzezinski recording, indicating 2 guns were shot on that night and 13 shots were fired. Hopefully the two of those things and the other things in Bill Pepper's brief will convince Judge Wistrick to grant at least an evidentiary hearing so that we can bring more media attention to the case and finally you know, bring it over ground after 40 years of terrific work by so many different researchers to try and see justice done in the case in Bobby Kennedy's name. So continuing on, I mean, I was looking at the California Penal Code today in terms of what a writ of habeas corpus is actually about, and in some of the code, this is the wording. I mean, it says a writ of habeas corpus may be prosecuted for, but not limited to, the following reasons: false evidence that is substantially material or probative on the issue of guilt or punishment was introduced against a person at any hearing or trial relating to his incarceration, or false physical evidence believed by a person to be factual, probative, or material on the issue of guilt. So, in just on those criteria alone, the work of Dwayne Wolfer, who was the LAPD criminalist and who kept highly incompetent paperwork, mislabeled several of the key envelopes concerning the bullets in the case. He actually said at the grand jury on June 7, 1968, that 3 of the main victim bullets, including the bullet retrieved from Bobby Kennedy's neck, came from Sirhan's gun and no other. That was his claim at the grand jury 2 days after the shooting. In 1975, an independent panel of 7 firearms examiners, convened by Judge Wenke, said that these bullets came from the same gun, but they could not conclusively match those bullets to Sirhan's gun. Therefore, Wolfer's testimony was wrong. Whether it was intentionally false or just incompetently false, I think it speaks to the habeas corpus petition. The experts also heavily criticised Wolfer's work in the case, and Wolfer was also under investigation for false testimony in another case involving Jack Kirschke during the Sirhan trial. So, on those 2 criteria, there's a lot of hope for our case. Also, another thing mentioned in the habeas corpus penal code is newly discovered evidence that could not have been discovered with reasonable diligence prior to judgment. So again, Dr. Brown's report, we knew nothing about CIA MKUltra programs until congressional hearings in the mid to late 70s. And again, until Dr. Brown got to work with Sirhan, in the last couple of years, none of these discoveries could have come to light. The same thing would have gone for the Brzezinski findings based on the Brzezinski recording, which wasn't available at the time of trial, and again was only rediscovered in the last few years and properly analysed with new technology. So, I feel that we have a very strong case. I'm very anxious and I'm looking forward to read Bill Pepper's submission when it goes public tomorrow. But I think for the first time we have a chance of movement in this case. And I know even if we get knocked back from Judge Wistrick and the Central District of California, there are still other options and momentum is building to really do something in this case. I think just to sum up, obviously in the last few days, the Natalie Wood case has been reopened and they're having another look at it, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. I think that could be helpful for the case in terms of showing that even after all these years, if there is sufficient evidence of actual innocence or actual other suspects in the case, that the Sheriff's Office or the District Attorney's Office could look into it. This kind of coincides too with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office records in the Sirhan case being released this past August by the California State Archives. I have no idea why it took so long, why it took over 40 years for these to be finally processed and released to the public. But I did take the time to go through them, and to be honest, they're not that interesting unless you're interested in what Sirhan ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner during his incarceration. But there is one kind of nugget in the records, if you want to call it that. Before the trial, Los Angeles Police Department Chief Thomas Redden actually asked the FBI and the Sheriff's Office to conduct independent assessments of the physical evidence in the case. Because they knew it was such a high-profile case, perhaps because they knew that Wolfer was under investigation for another case, and they just wanted a second eye cast over the physical evidence in the case. J. Edgar Hoover refused to get the FBI involved, but the Sheriff's Office and the Sheriff at the time, Peter Pitchess, and his crime lab were ready and willing to go and do it. They were contacted in early February, just before the evidence came up in court proceedings. But unfortunately what then happened was that Grant Cooper in open court stipulated that the bullets from the Sirhan gun were the bullets that killed Kennedy. So essentially the District Attorney Evel Younger, with the option open for the Sheriff's Office to re-examine and verify Wolfer's work on the ballistics side of the case, didn't have to go through that process. Younger decided that there was no benefit and no need for him to take a second look at the physical evidence, and that's one of the key reasons why the case is such a mess today. Why later in 1975, Wolfer's work was basically called a laughingstock by the 7 independent experts from all over the nation who looked at it, and why now with the Brzezinski discoveries, we've never been as uncertain as we are in terms of how many guns were fired, how many shots were fired, who else was involved, and so on. I think, for all of these reasons, there is urgent need to reopen the case, an urgent need for at least an evidentiary hearing to bring some of this stuff out in the open to be debated, not just by you know, the central court in the California district, but also in the media and you know, in the public forum in the States. So I hope that, you know, these highlights of the case this year, I think they've pushed the whole case forward, and hopefully there'll be even more developments next year with Bill Pepper and his team leading the charge. So I hope you can still read me, and it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I think I'm going to have to stop recording now and go on Skype. Maybe if any of you have any questions. I just got an email there from Joe as well. So let me just check the email before I bid you good night if I can. Okay, so yeah, I've just got an email from Joe. So you're going to do questions by email. So I'm not going to shut down the Ustream. I'm going to stay on here. And okay, my first question is, please talk about your JFK book. I'm not too sure if you mean my RFK book. I know I put in the summary or synopsis that you may have got handed out there that I am actually working on a new JFK film. So it's a little early to really speak about that in any great detail. But I've just finished a feature documentary called Children of the Revolution, and I'm now moving on to make a film on the JFK case, which I hope will be ready for 2013, well, which will definitely be ready for 2013, which is obviously the 50th anniversary. My feeling is that drama documentary may be the most interesting and accessible form for the film to take. So a mix of documentary, interviews with people conducive to the investigation I'll be doing for that, but also dramatization of some of the key scenes around Kennedy and Oswald in the years and months leading up to the assassination. So, you know, again, it's a very early stage, but I'm just developing it now, early development now, but I do hope to get it underway and have a significant update for you this time next year at the COPA conference. So I'm not going to speak any more to it than that because it's too early really to say. But I just want to underline, you know, from what I've said in terms of the Sirhan case, again, that's also something I'd love to make another film on, because I think once it hits court and there's an evidentiary hearing or there's any kind of trial proceedings, you know, I'll be out with my camera again, and again, having the footage of the parole hearing and tracking all this through, and hopefully interviewing Dr. Dan Brown in person. I think there's a terrific film there too that focuses more on Sirhan and his experience of the last 40 years. So, you know, I'm still very tuned into both of those assassinations, and hopefully I'll be able to update you next year about where those projects are at that stage. So yeah, I guess I'll wait for any more questions by email.